Mr. President, on this occasion of your birthday, this lovely lady is not only punctilious, but punctual. Mr. President, Marilyn Monroe. A woman about whom it truly may be said she needs no introduction. But let me just say, here she is. But I'll give her an introduction anyway, Mr. President, because in the history of show business, perhaps there has been no one female who meant so much, who has done more. Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
President, for all the things you've done, the battles that you've won, the way you deal with U.S. Steel and our problems by the ton. We thank you so much. Everybody, happy birthday!
President of the United States. I can now retire from politics after having had Happy Birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way.
I'm here with the amazing Joyce Carol Oates to talk about the 20th anniversary of her book, Blonde. I just want to say I hope everyone is safe and well and not going crazy. You know, I have a million questions, Joyce, about the book, but I have to make a comment about the video that just played. For those of you who don't know or are very new to the planet, that was 1962, Madison Square Garden. It was John F. Kennedy's 46th birthday, and Marilyn Monroe was the last performer. There were about, I don't know, 25 performers. And apparently, the interesting thing is nobody remembers, it's written about, but nobody remembers any of the other performers. You know, she blew them away. She was wearing a dress that she had made for the occasion. She asked the Hollywood designer, Jean Louis, to design a dress only Marilyn Monroe could wear. And the sad thing, of course, is that that was in May, and she died about 2 months later. So it's a kind of tragic, you know, it's also that tragic joke when he introduces her as the late Marilyn Monroe. But anyhow, it is also almost the last chapter in Blonde. And the book is, I think the book, which is a big epic kind of saga to me, it begins with a kind of symbolic idea of death coming to her. And then we go through her life. But I wanted to ask you something very simple, Joyce. I believe, if I'm not wrong, that you got initially interested in writing about Marilyn Monroe because you saw a picture of her when she was very young and not yet a movie star. Is that right? Oh, look who's here. Look at that. That's Zanchi. Zanchi, get off the screen. We have stuff to talk about.
I'm afraid she steals every scene, just like Marilyn Monroe stole every scene. Jonathan, just to say a little more about the dress. The dress cost $5,000 in 1961.
1962, yeah.
So I don't know what that would be in today's currency, but she was worried in my novel, and probably in real life, about whether she would be, whether they would pay for that. She had to pay for her own dress, and she was questioning whether the Kennedy people would ever pay for it. And the chapter ends with her back home, and she's such a wreck. She was very drunk, and she was high on cocaine, I guess, when she was high on something when she was
I think pills, probably.
Yes, yeah. And she came in, but she was drinking also. And it was such a heart-rending performance because it actually is quite an engaging performance. I mean, at first it seems that she doesn't know where she is.
Mm.
She becomes much more assured. Yes, the contrast between that vision of Marilyn Monroe, so artificial with her hair, so platinum blonde, and she's sewed into this crazy dress. It's so different from the early images of her when she was just Norma Jean Baker. She was just a high school girl when this picture was taken that I saw. And I had always thought it would be so interesting to have a visual representation of how she metamorphoses from the girl whose name was Norma Jean Baker, who had brunette hair, and she was pretty but not glamorous, that by degrees she turns into this almost Andy Warhol-like mass-produced, totally artificial concoction at the end of her life.
Yeah, yeah. I think that watching that film, I think in certain ways, so many of us have seen that clip many times that it loses, I think, I mean, it's still an extraordinary performance, I think, despite any of the, I think, I was just thinking when you said that, you know, at the end of the evening, she was sad, and yes, she brought Arthur Miller's father was her date for that night.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, he was her date, and she dropped him off at home first, and then came home. It was probably 4 in the morning when she finally got home. So I can't believe they didn't pay for that dress, because $5,000 in '62 had to be a lot of money.
I know. That was Peter Lawford.
Yeah.
Peter
I'm sorry. I was going to just say, for those who don't know who was introducing her, Joyce just said Peter Lawford, who was then married to Kennedy's sister, Pat Lawford. And he was also very much not only known as the president's brother-in-law, but the president's pimp, because he was instrumental in getting John Kennedy women.
Yeah, and they were having this love affair that was very ultimately sort of disastrous for Marilyn Monroe. So she sort of served up as this almost ironic beauty. And Kennedy was sitting up on a balcony, I think, and he had his legs, his feet on the edge of the rim of the balcony. He was smoking a cigar, and he was with his buddies. I think Jacqueline Kennedy did not come that night. So he's probably making these coarse remarks about her, even as she was singing "Mr. President." So,
Yeah.
so sad.
Yeah. I want to also then just say, you initially, you didn't intend to write a big book about this figure of Marilyn Monroe, did you? And how, I wonder how that came about, that it turned into this large and very encompassing novel.
Well, it sounds somewhat crazy, but I was going to write a novella of about 180 pages. It would have been a very sort of postmodernist look at how this girl, who was only 15 in the picture of her high school, she's very, very young. She becomes a starlet, and then at one point she's given the name Marilyn Monroe, and that was going to be the end of the novella, so that we see how she's changing into this other person. But when I got to that part, I was starting to watch her movies in chronological order, and I saw that obviously the great challenge would be to follow her through her entire life. So that I kept writing, and ultimately had 1,400 pages in manuscript that had to be cut back.
How long did the book take you? A number of years to write?
Oh, I think overall a couple of years. I was working on it very compulsively throughout most of the writing. I remember having psychosomatic symptoms and things that never had happened to me with my other writing, because I wanted so badly to do the best that I could. And it got longer and longer and longer. Mm. I remember coming out into the kitchen and saying to my husband at that time, with this look of terror in my eyes, I said, I've written like 500 pages and that's only like 1950 or something. I said, I'm never going to end this.
And it's difficult, of course, to take on, I think, you tell me, but to take on a tragic figure in a way, someone who becomes a tragic figure, because there's the inevitability that how this person is going to die. And of course, you did that at the beginning in a beautiful way, this kind of symbolic kid on a messenger bike coming to deliver death. And so I thought it's just an extraordinary beginning of the book. So was that your way also of sort of bookending this life you were writing about?
Yes, I think so. The novel has a structure that's basically a mystery structure. I don't think anyone's ever noticed it. You know, writers do things that nobody notices except the writer. And so it does have a structure of a mystery. So she receives this message, she receives a package from the messenger, and she opens it. And then we don't know what it is until the very end of the novel. Because this is so interesting, and anyone who's listening can also write about this, because I didn't really go into it that much. In one of the biographies is a photograph of Marilyn Monroe taken the day before she died. She's sitting in her back lawn. I think there may be a pool there. And on the ground, on the grass, is a little stuffed animal. Mm. And nobody knows what that was, who sent it to her, got lost or taken away. But she got this package in the mail, evidently. I think her housekeeper said she opened it. She was very sad. She dropped it on the lawn. You can see it in the photograph. So I sort of structured the whole novel around her getting that package. And then later on, at the very end of the novel, we see what it is and what it means to her. Right. So I like to write about mysteries that are maybe not solved in real life, and try to write about them and speculate on a possible solution.
Yeah, it reminded me in a kind of filmic way, like Rosebud, you know, with Citizen Kane, that had that kind of mystery. I wanted to say, at the beginning, very beginning of your book, there's an author's note from you. And you say, biographical facts regarding Marilyn Monroe should be sought not in Blonde, which is not intended as an historical document, but in biographies of the subject. So and what you go on to create, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you create a kind of bio novel or a fictional biography. And can you comment on how you used, let's say, facts and events as jumping off points? Because the book goes into amazingly beautiful passages that, well, you talk.
Well, it's a genre that interests me very much. I did a short novel about H.P. Lovecraft. I've written about Hemingway. I've written about Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson. I find it so fascinating to write about these people using most of the biographical information. The historical information is legitimate. I don't make up dates. What I do is I try to immerse myself in the personalities and sort of just imagine what they might be thinking or some of the dialogue. That, of course, is irretrievable. We don't really know what these people were thinking. I always try to elevate the characters a bit. Marilyn Monroe, or Norma Jean Baker, was actually very intelligent. She was taking classes and different kinds of courses and lessons all of her life. Other actors and stars like Ava Gardner and Elizabeth Taylor, they had no interest in really, bettering themselves. They didn't take courses, they didn't take classes. Marilyn Monroe was always feeling insecure. She always wanted to learn, and she was always reading. So I thought that if she had a diary or a journal, it would be fairly elevated. And she tried to write poetry. I used one little poem of hers.
Yeah, you use one poem of hers and then you create other poems for her.
Yeah, I made up other poems, yes.
Yeah, I mean, when you said you were speaking, you said being inside her head. I think that's one of the extraordinary things in the book, because it doesn't matter whether, this one can't say this is factual information if you're inside her head, but we really get a feeling of this person, this creature, this film star, this woman, I think. And you also do this thing where there are many different voices and points of view that tell the story. So I'm wondering, how did you write the story? Did you build it with these fragments?
Well, I imagined it as being told by her. She's in a posthumous dimension. We don't know where she is. She's imagining the whole novel herself. It's sort of her voice, and she's imagining other people's voices. And after she dies, there are people making comments about her. All throughout the novel, there's italicized passages. People are constantly making comments about her, usually about her physical body. And she's sort of aware of this, and some of it is imagination on her part, but some of it is fairly authentic. Like the remarks that Laurence Olivier made about her, about working with her, those are real. And Richard Widmark and some others, they said certain things about her. They were almost always, in every case, people underestimated her. Actors who were working with her, like Laurence Olivier and Richard Widmark, they were so condescending to her when they started out. They just thought she was, very second rate. And then when they saw the movie, they couldn't believe she had stolen every scene she was in. Richard Widmark said he couldn't believe it. He was supposed to be the star. His name was over the title of the movie. He could not believe it. This starlet he had been condescending to had stolen every scene that they were in.
Yeah. Well, when they were making Some Like It Hot, and there are those legendary stories that Billy Wilder has confirmed about, 50 takes to say, it's me, Sugar, and Jack Lemmon or Tony Curtis saying, when are we gonna, what take are we gonna use? And Billy Wilder said, we're gonna use the take where Marilyn gets it right. And the reason he said that was because when Marilyn's on the screen, that's who everyone is watching.
I know, it's so amazing because, as you know, if you read the novel, Some Like It Hot was a time in her life she was so miserable.
Yeah.
She was so suicidal and so depressed. When I saw that movie and when I knew about her biographical situation, I literally could not believe it. face that she puts on for the world, the acting, the wit, the kind of vivacity, I mean, her beautiful, radiant skin, all of that is totally acting.
Yeah, it's amazing because she is luminescent, beautiful, funny, touching, and she was miserable. Yeah, I know. I've read that.
It's just no way to, there's no way when you look at that screen persona to have any idea what was in her mind and what was going on in her life. But she was also addicted to these awful barbiturates.
Yeah, yeah.
Vanishing, really. So I learned so much about her in the writing of the novel. But I think it may be true for many of us that we position ourselves in the world like actors, and we're presenting a persona to the world. Some people have no idea what the reality is.
Oh, absolutely true. I mean, I was about to say, yeah, I'm like not wearing any pants at the moment. No, that's not true. But no, I was just, because of this, I was looking up a lot of things, and there was a Jack Lemmon clip talking about working with her. And he was saying it wasn't that she was intentionally ever difficult. She always apologized, but she would be off camera and getting herself worked up to be able to say a line. And he said, and it's just that she couldn't do it until she was absolutely ready. And it drove them all crazy. But he said he saw the pain and agony she went to produce this person, this persona.
Well, it's just very interesting because as I was investigating her background for the novel, she was like a method actor. She had to find something in her own life that corresponded with what she was doing. So the emotions that she projects on screen, she had to find a real life analog for that feeling. So she would cast her mind about. In one chapter of my novel, she's playing a character who's mentally unbalanced like her own mother. So she goes out to visit with her mother, and she takes note of how her mother is wringing her hands, and her mother shows her anxiety with her hands. And she realizes that's the key. That's what I've got to do in the movie. She's constantly searching for some way to make her performance really natural. And she also did ask, as she does in my novel, in real life, she would ask if she could write some of the dialogue. Of course, she was not allowed to do that.
No. One of the great things in your book is that you include like the development of Los Angeles, the development of the film industry, you know, the Stanislavski, which is the method acting. You talk about the Blacklist and the House Un-American Activities. Did you have to do tons of research for that, for those parts?
Well, as John Updike said, the research is the innocent part.
Yeah.
Easy part. I think if you're writing a historical novel, and almost all novels are historical, the notes that you're taking and the reading that you're doing is so seductive. You could spend years and years taking notes, and then, you know, finally when you begin your novel, you're exhausted. So the trick is to start your novel and continue with the research in a parallel way. Like you could do your research and read in the evening and do your writing during the day.
So you do that often. You're doing your research and the writing, so that I understand that. Yes, so that there's always that danger of being overwhelmed by your research.
You can be overwhelmed and you can get depressed and paralyzed.
Yeah.
When I wrote a book on boxing, I did the same thing.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that, but I also I was thinking, and this is a preparation to ask you if you'll read a little, because Arthur Miller said about Marilyn Monroe, I never saw her unhappy in public. She fed off the love and adulation. And I think there's many places in the book that there's one in particular that really shows this, if you don't mind reading that.
Okay, well this is funny. It's meant to be funny. At the same time, it's sort of pathetic. The novel takes her through her entire life. So she started out, she's Norma Jean Baker. She's only a child, and her name is Norma. Norma Jean Baker is her name. Then she becomes a model, then she becomes a starlet, and finally she gets her name, Marilyn Monroe. So there's an overlap when she's both Norma Jean and Marilyn Monroe, and some people know her, you know, both ways. Then there's a point when she's doing the movie with Richard Widmark, she looks around and she sees everyone on the set, everyone and right now does not know Norma Jean. They only know Marilyn Monroe. So she's advanced to that point. Then as the novel continues, she's described as the blonde actress. So she's taken on a kind of mythic quality, and she's a little bit estranged from herself. And then she's the blonde actress through much of the novel. But then at the end of the novel, she goes back to being Norma Jean again as she's moving toward her death. So the section I'm going to read here is when she is married to the ex-athlete who in real life was Joe DiMaggio. She's married to the ex-athlete and then later to the playwright. These are somewhat mythical figures. They're not meant to be literally Joe DiMaggio or Arthur Miller. So she and the ex-athlete are in Tokyo. They're on their honeymoon and he's doing appearances. And she is approached by an American general, says, would you come to Seoul? Would you come to South Korea to an army camp and just make a just visit? And she decides to leave her husband in Tokyo and go off and give this astonishing performance, which is based on something that really happened. I know when I read this, you will probably think this didn't happen, but it did happen, more or less just like this. So she leaves him and he will never forgive her, we know. Amid a frenzy of photographers and TV crews, the blonde actress was escorted by military personnel on a bumpy flight to Seoul, capital of South Korea. Then by bumpier helicopter to Marine and Army encampments in the countryside. The blonde actress wore olive drab Army issue long johns, pants, shirt, windbreaker, and heavy lace-up boots. Her head was protected from icy winds by an Army cap buckled beneath the chin. Now this is italicized because these are men thinking about her. Was Marilyn scared? Hell no, she wasn't scared at all. Maybe she didn't know that helicopters have accidents, especially in high winds like we had. Maybe she even thought if Marilyn's in the helicopter, it can't crash. Or maybe, like she assured us in this little girl voice to die for, if my number's up, it's up, or not. A corporal, a reporter for Stars and Stripes, was designated to accompany the blonde actress to the camps. For a cover feature, he'd report how the blonde actress amazed everyone in the helicopter, especially the pilot, by asking, could they please fly low over the camp before landing so she could wave to the men? So the pilot flies low over the camp and the blonde actress presses against the glass, waving excitedly as a little girl at a few scattered men who happen to be outside and glance up and recognize her. Of course, every guy in the camp knows Marilyn Monroe is due sometime, but not exactly when. Do it again, please, coos the blonde actress, and the pilot laughs like a kid and swings the copter around and takes it back over the camp like a pendulum. And the wind is shaking us, and the blonde actress waves at the men again. And already there's a lot more men. And this time the men are waving back, yelling and running after the copter like crazed kids. We're thinking we're going to land, but next the blonde actress amazes us even more, saying, let's surprise them, huh? Open the door and hang on to me. And we can't believe it when this gorgeous, crazy broad wants to do it, but she's got the idea. She needs to do it. Like it's a movie scene, maybe. She can see how it would play from the ground. The aerial view and the ground view are alternating. And it's a suspenseful scene too. So she lies down on the copter floor and instructs us to grab onto her legs And suddenly we're all in this movie. We slide the door open part way and the wind's practically enough to capsize us, but Marilyn is determined and even takes off her cap so they can see who it is. And she leans out the door and is almost falling, not scared, but laughing at us because we're scared, holding her legs so hard she'd be bruised by our fingers for sure. But the pilot does what she requests. By this time, he's figuring, like her, like all of us, if anybody's number is up, it's up. And if not, not. So we caroom over the camp with Marilyn Monroe hanging out of our aircraft, waving and blowing kisses to the men, screaming, "Oh, I love you, you American GIs." Not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 times. By this time, the entire camp's out, officers, the camp commander, everybody. Guys on KP, guys in the infirmary in pajamas. Guy in latrine stumbling outside and holding up their pants. "Marilyn, Marilyn," everybody's yelling. Guys climb up onto roofs and water tanks, and some of them fall and break bones, the poor saps. One guy out of the infirmary slips and falls in the stampede and is trampled. It's a mob scene. Feeding time in the zoo, apes and monkeys. MPs have to beat the most reckless guys back from the landing strip. The copter lands and there's Marilyn Monroe climbing up, flanked by us guys, looking like we'd been electric shocked and loved it. Marilyn's got frostbite white cheeks and nose and those big, bright, glassy blue eyes and long lashes, and her hair's in wild clumps. That hair of a color we'd never seen before except in movies, and you wouldn't think it's real, but it is. And she's got tears in her eyes crying, oh, this is the happiest day of my life." And if we hadn't stopped her, she'd have run right out and grabbed guys' hands where they were reaching for her. She'd have hugged and kissed them, like she's everybody's sweetheart from back home. The mob would have torn her limb from limb, loving her. For sure, they'd have torn her wild, beaten blonde hair out by the roots, crazy with love for Marilyn. So we had to hold them back, and she didn't fight us, but she sang like it's a profound Zen truth that hit her square between the eyes. "This is the happiest day of my life. Oh, thank you." Absolutely, you could see that she meant it.
That's such a great scene. And I know that that scene is a true scene, that she had the helicopter guy circle and she hung out of the helicopter with them holding onto her legs. It's so crazy.
It's so crazy, but I think really, as they were saying in the novel, she felt she was in a movie.
Yeah.
In that movie, you don't die. That if you're an actor on stage, you don't die. You're somehow protected.
Do you think maybe because she was playing Marilyn, she was playing that part, that she was sort of like not vulnerable if she was playing Marilyn? I don't know, maybe.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of hypnosis that comes over us when we're on camera, when we're doing something on stage. There's this illusion or delusion of immortality.
Yeah. You know, when you talked about, I thought you referred to, the ex-athlete, the playwright, the president. And it struck me, I read the book 20 years ago, and then I was rereading parts of it for this. And it struck me that it was not just a mythic way to deal with these men in her life, but it was sort of a way to objectify them in the same way that Marilyn was objectified, as a sex object, as the blonde. Was that your intent when you were doing that?
Yes, they perceive her as the blonde actress. They never get to know Norma Jean.
Right.
Only a few people know Norma Jean Baker, and people who did know her actually were living in New York City. She was involved with the Actors Studio. And I actually knew some people like Tom Palumbo, who's no longer with us, but Tom knew her. And when she was at the Actors Studio living in New York, she didn't wear a lot of makeup, and she would wear just sort of ordinary clothes and a scarf over her hair. And she could move about the city without being really recognized. That was really her.
Yeah, it seems to me she should have stayed in New York And she would have been a lot happier than going back to Los Angeles, where she was treated like nothing, you know, no matter how successful she was.
Where she went back because they needed money. Arthur Miller wanted her to make money too.
Yeah.
He had worked, didn't he work on the Misfits? I mean,
well, she went back. Yeah, it was, I guess, did she? Well, I don't know. She went back to the Misfits was a real disaster, but the last film, she went back to LA also too. And that's when she bought her house to make Something's Gotta Give, and which we know was never finished. And yeah, sorry.
She made so much money. There was so much money there. It was really, she may have felt she could come back to New York after she made some money.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people down here. I think I'm going to see some of these questions, Joyce, and I'll, okay, let's see.
Oh, I want to show this.
Oh my God, please, please. I did this drawing for Joyce for her birthday last year.
Is that one?
Let's see, I'm trying to,
Jonathan's a great artist.
well, let's not get carried away. Joyce, somebody is asking.
I'm going to hide behind this. Okay, go ahead.
Did you self-consciously write Blonde as a kind of Dickensian tale as opposed to a biographical fiction? This is from Eric Anderson.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, this definitely has
Put down that drawing. Put down that drawing. Let's see you, please. Okay.
It has that definite Dickensian wildness and exaggeration. You know, the fantastic energy of Dickens is certainly in some parts of the novel. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is, you know, you started to talk about it a little, the idea that the way you break if you don't put that drawing down, Joyce, listen, I was going to call you earlier and say, let's both wear blonde wigs, but I didn't know you'd do it. Anyhow.
For a woman to put Marilyn Monroe's face up next to her.
The way you broke up the novel, it feels sort of Dickensian, you know, from in those 5 parts, from child to girl, the girl to the woman to Marilyn Monroe. And I'm going to go back to the questions, but was that a way for you to organize the novel? Did you do that later, or did you do that as you were working? I can't speak.
Well, the novel has a historical grid, so to speak. Things that happen to her, let's say there are a certain continuum, and then things that happen in the world. So I put them together. So nothing profound and significant in the real world is left out of the novel. You know, the House Un-American Activities Committee and Senator Joseph McCarthy and things that were going on. I put them in the novel, things that Marlon Brando was doing, but they are sort of in the background and they're kind of woven together with her life.
Uh-huh. Which would feel like, let's say, a more standard biography, that you covered the life. But there's something, as you even say about your book, that it's a fictionalized biography, though. It's interesting because you slide in and out of truth, and it becomes, in a way, a larger truth or a bigger picture of this person than had you stuck to the biographical facts, I think.
Yes, well, it's interesting. When the novel first came out, some people who read it were men, and the men would say to me, or they wrote me letters in those days, they said, you know, I identify with Marilyn Monroe, this yearning, this insecurity, always wanting to do better, to perfect yourself. Many people in the world don't care at all about perfecting themselves. They don't want criticism. They don't want to improve. But there's a small category of people who don't feel that they have the right to live. I think that Norma Jean Baker never felt, because her mother didn't really love her and her father had never acknowledged her. Mm-hmm. She didn't really feel that, in an ontological sense, that she deserved to be on Earth. Therefore, people in that category of being, they keep trying harder and harder and harder They take classes, they get advanced degrees, they write books, they do all sorts of things. They could even have like 11 children, you know. It's a compulsion to justify your existence. So some men who read the novel could identify with that.
That's interesting with men. Here's some from John Waite. When I finished Blonde, I felt overwhelming sadness for Monroe. It's made it hard to watch the movies, understanding that she was victimized. Are you able to still enjoy the movies?
Well, let's put it this way. We put the best of ourselves into our art. And so most people don't have any way of making their lives permanent, but an artist who could be very depressed, very suicidal, even not a nice person even, it doesn't matter so much if the art is somehow quasi-permanent. It's out there, whether you're Hemingway or Faulkner or James Joyce or Marilyn Monroe, you're leaving or David Foster Wallace, who committed suicide. You're leaving behind something that is in the community. It's a communal work for other people to participate in after you're gone. So no, I would say that the best thing you could do for Marilyn Monroe to honor her would to see her with the eyes of respect and admiration, and see her as a serious actress who was actually excellent. She was very, very good. The fact that she was also suicidal and she was also very depressed, that is probably something that she would like you not to remember.
I think that's true. There's a very good question here from Susan Frierson. She says to you, Joyce, when you reread a book of yours from 20 years ago, does it feel like you wrote it, or does it feel like somebody else's writing?
Well, I was rereading this novel just today because I've been doing Zoom classes, and so I've been working very hard on the computer. So today I took up my own novel and was reading it again. No, it all comes back to me. It just comes back in great swaths of passages. Yeah, a lot of it comes back. I can tell what's going to come like I turn the page. Mm-hmm. I always wanted to do a companion novel. I wanted it to sound so, it sounds so outlandish. I wanted to write a novel about Joe Louis. And I wanted to make that novel expansive and picaresque. Of course, it would be tragic also. And I wanted to do the same for Joe Louis that I did for Marilyn Monroe. But a number of factors just mitigated against that. So I never did it.
All right, let me look at, this keeps bouncing up. Let's see. What does this say? Now there are things that are, oh, by the way, everyone, go buy the book. You can go buy it from the Center for Fiction right now. Now something's happened to my Q&A. Let me just try, here we go. Sorry about that, folks. We're all in a new whatever here, right? So Eric Matthews says, I have two questions. Was the original title for Blonde, Gemini, an intertextual reference to Don DeLillo's Libra?
Well, Gemini was Marilyn's sign. And I think when I was writing the novel, I might have called it that for a while. No, it wasn't. I wasn't making a reference.
His second question is, what is your favorite Marilyn Monroe movie and why?
Well, I actually like Niagara very much. I introduced it out at Princeton. There's a special series out in Princeton of professors pick a movie and talk about it a little, introduce it. So I chose Niagara.
It's interesting because the studios she never played another nasty character after Niagara. And in Niagara, she's a murderess, you know, and after that, never again.
Well, it's such a good movie. She was really acting very, very, very interesting acting. And the whole movie is quite fascinating. The German expressionism in the lighting and the starkness and the sort of existential dread. Yeah, it's very, very good, I think.
Yeah, it is. And she, yeah. So
That's,
I'm looking to see more questions. Let's see. Randy Souther says, you wrote a lovely short story, Three Girls, which included Marilyn Monroe as a character. Was this part of the original manuscript for Blonde?
yes, I had all these wonderful little stories about Marilyn Monroe intersecting with the lives of other people. So in the novel now, I had to take many of them out. In the novel, the only one that's left now is these young people in an English class, a literature class at UCLA, and they're remembering her. She was in the class, but under a different name, and they're remembering her. So I wanted to write a whole series of chapters where other people interrelated with Marilyn Monroe, sometimes not knowing who she was. And I found that just delightful. So the Three Girls, it's called Three Girls. It takes place at the Strand bookstore.
I know that I happen to know that you've written other Marilyn Monroe stories. One you did for an anthology of mine, and you've just written something recent, which is not yet published.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. She's very, very inspiring.
Yeah. I mean, you think you're finished with her, and then no, something happens. Or,
Well, there's so many things to say about her. For instance, if you look at the Andy Warhol, the lithographs, you know,
mhm.
appropriating her image in a very debased way. She was very beautiful, and she was more than beautiful. She was pretty and innocent, and there was a childlike quality to her. Andy Warhol makes her into a very flat, almost ugly caricature. He caricatures her, and of course, he makes millions of dollars. He made many, many more millions of dollars on her image than she made as herself, which is so fraught with irony.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, he called his studio the factory, which was not ironic. He wanted his artwork to look manufactured. He did the same thing for Elizabeth Taylor, for Jackie Kennedy. You know, it was kind of his sort of flat, iconic, those pop visions, which are devoid. You know, you have to bring the emotion to that art because of your knowledge of that person or that thing. Let's see other, yeah.
But I felt such outrage because Marilyn Monroe made millions, or by this time, billions of dollars for other people. She was so poor that when she died, her body was taken to the LA County morgue.
Yeah, she didn't leave that much money. She's generated more since she has died, which is horrifying.
My novel doesn't follow her after she dies. It ends with the last beat of her heart. But if I had, maybe I should have done that because her body is taken to the LA County morgue.
Yeah, yes. Here's a question from Jane Sosland. How is a real character derived from a live person different in how you develop story from making up a completely fictional character? I guess I'm asking you how you develop character and find character.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're working in a very realistic mode, you probably would try to rein in your imagination. If you're doing something that's sort of postmodernist and experimental, which was what I was doing, you can really make up a good deal. I attribute to Marilyn Monroe these various writings, things that she has said that I made up. You know, it's like the two of us are collaborating. I wouldn't do that in a realistic novel. You could not do that. And also, if you're writing a biography, you're confined by the truth. You can't just make things up.
Here's one, and it's from Saskia Levy, and she addresses it, by the way, to the great Joyce Carol Oates. She says, at the entrance of Marilyn's Brentwood home, there was a tile, you know this, which read, Cursum Perficio, my journey is over. Do you think this was kind of prophetic?
Yes, absolutely. There's so much in her life that was prophetic. So many things, so many coincidences. She has this sort of air of fatality throughout the whole movie, so it's like a B movie irony, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was true. Many of these things were true.
I had a question for you that this is not the first time you've used a real character or an event and made it into fiction. I mean, one of my favorite very short novel of yours, Black Water, uses Chappaquiddick, and it's like just an amazing book. If people have not read it, I'll bet the Center for Fiction has it for you to buy. Black Water, or Zombie, which I think is the scariest book I ever read, which is a serial killer. I think it's maybe based on Jeffrey Dahmer, or am I wrong? I might be.
Jeffrey Dahmer and also Ted Bundy and some others.
And I know My Sister, My Love is based loosely on John Benet Ramsey murder. So you've been attracted to these. Tell me how and why these things got to you, and why because to write a novel takes a long commitment. So I wonder about that.
Well, I'm drawn to things that are emblematic and talismanic, that seem to have some universal significance. Like Black Water, the Chappaquiddick incident, is very much in the modes of the imaginative mode of Death and the Maiden. You know, there are ballads and medieval woodcuts of somebody. He looks like a knight. He comes along in the forest, and he beckons to a young girl who naively, and she gets on the horse behind him, and they go off together. He's really death. So what I perceived of the Chappaquiddick incident as such a sad episode in our history, I was sort of extracting from it that kind of skeletal ballad-like story that has resonance beyond just the literal, the newspaper article. So I have to be able to write about something that has a universal validity. When Melville wrote about Moby Dick, there really was a white whale. There really was a legendary white whale. And so when he was writing about it, he was infusing it with a lot of mythological significance, particularly in Ahab's fevered imagination. At the same time, it was real.
Yeah, when you mentioned Death and the Maiden, it brings to mind one of the great short stories, which you just happen to have written. Where are you going? Where have you been? Where she is drunk, which is also based on something that you read. And it's an incredible story about a young girl who is being seduced, right?
Yes, that was based on something, but I changed the story very much. I often change the stories.
Well, of course, but I mean, that's based on a true, isn't it based on a serial killer as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but instead of talking about the serial killer, he basically, he's in the background and focused on the girl.
Yeah, good. You know, I want to, before we run out of time, we're also impressed and admiring of the way you can produce these amazing novels. And so I happen to know that you actually do have a life outside of writing. I've witnessed it, I've been there. So can you talk a little bit about your process for people who are writers and people who are watching?
Well, that really depends upon what the project is. When I was working on Blonde, I have to say, I was really obsessed with it. And the writing was like something had me by the throat. That's not usually my experience with writing. I'm not really a compulsive writer. I enjoy writing. I love working with language, and I love reading. I mean, my first love is reading. And then, of course, writing is an emulation of the reading that we've done. But writing Blonde was different. And I was so grateful to finish it, because when we think we're writing something that means something to us, we're so afraid of dying. Writers are always afraid of dying before they finish what they're working on. There's this sort of mad gasp, like you're running toward a finish line that you hope you won't collapse before you get there. So I'm not sure that I could do Blonde again, but I'd love to have a subject. As I said, I would like to have written about Joe Louis and infused him with all this mythological significance, which he actually did have. But there are many reasons why, for a white woman to be writing about a great black athlete, I think today people wouldn't accept that. It would be so much, it would be just dissonant, you know. I couldn't do it today.
Well, that's a whole other topic, but I had so many thoughts about that, and I want to talk about your process. Although I would say that there are many books at certain points I thought they were really good, and it probably would have been better if I had died and left that unfinished novel, and somebody would say, God, this would have been so great, and in fact I ruined it. But when you write, I know every day, but you don't write. What is your daily schedule in terms of your writing? You know, you wake up and then you work and then you do this. And because I know that you're an avid reader, I know that you love film, and so you have all this time somehow, even though you're so productive.
Well, I really like to write and read. So a lot of what I'm doing is I'm doing something that I like to do. So it's like falling asleep at night and dreaming. The dreams are very intense. And there's a brain activity. You can wake up, be exhausted, but nonetheless, it's something that's very pleasurable and very significant, because even if you have a nightmare, it's your nightmare. Nobody else could have had it.
Huh. You like that idea, huh? The nightmare. I'm going to see if there's one last question that we can look at. Ashley Teglieri says, how do you feel about your novels being adapted into film?
Well, everything I've seen that anyone's done, with maybe one exception that's embarrassing, has been really so interesting, because actors are artists and directors are artists. And so it's exciting to see somebody's perspective on your work. Of course, it's very much selected and it's much more skeletal. Ideally, I think a short story makes a better movie than a novel would make, because the less verbiage there is for the director to deal with, the better.
Right. So I think hasn't Blonde been adapted already, or is being adapted, or what?
Yes, I think it's supposed to be on Netflix at some point. I haven't seen anything more about it. I hear about it from time to time. The novel was optioned, but it took so long to make it that one by one all the blonde actresses aged out. Oates was one at one point, and some others, and they just got too old. So a lot of time has gone by.
Well, you know, what's of course difficult in any movie adaptation or any adaptation of a story of somebody like Marilyn Monroe is when you watch it, you miss Marilyn Monroe. So it's a little difficult. But let's see. I think, I don't know, I'm seeing if somebody from the Center for Fiction, I think this is probably, is it 8:30? Oh, yes, there's Melanie. Well, thank you, Joyce. It was always great talking to you. Glad you brought the kitty in for a little cameo. Everyone go to the Center for Fiction's website and buy Blonde. It's 700 pages. It will keep you occupied while we're in quarantine. It's really, Joyce, if you don't put that drawing down over there, and you're in trouble.
I think I have a lot of nerve to put this up.
But go buy Blonde. It will keep you mesmerized for a long time. And watch the rest of the Center for Fiction videos. The Center for Fiction is one of the greatest places now in Brooklyn, and beautiful and so important to writers and readers. I can't begin to say how much I believe in it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you both for that wonderful conversation. Folks, you can find this on our website if you want to watch it all over again. And like Jonathan said, you can find the book on our website as well. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks especially Joyce and Jonathan.
Night all. Stay so safe and well.